The fluorescent lights of Municipal Courtroom 3 hummed, casting a sterile, unforgiving glow on the proceedings. Every surface, from the polished oak of the benches to the scuffed linoleum floor, seemed to reflect the stark, unyielding nature of the law. The air itself was thick, not just with the faint scent of disinfectant, but with the palpable weight of unspoken judgments, of lives hanging in the precarious balance of legal pronouncements. Each creak of a chair, each rustle of paper, seemed to amplify the tension, a low, resonant thrum beneath the surface of official decorum. At the defense table, a solitary figure, Marcus M.J. Jones, sat hunched. Barely 18, his slim frame, still holding the gangly promise of a growth spurt, seemed dwarfed by the imposing furniture. His hands, usually nimble and quick, capable of assembling intricate circuits or sketching complex nebulae, were clasped tightly in his lap. His eyes, normally alight with the boundless curiosity of a budding astrophysicist, were downcast, fixed with an almost desperate intensity on the scuffed toes of his worn sneakers. In his right hand, he clutched a crumpled piece of paper, its edges softened from repeated handling. It was a hastily scrawled note from his mother, a lifeline in this suffocating environment. "Stay calm, tell the truth. I love you." Across the aisle, leaning back in his chair with an air of almost theatrical disdain, sat Officer David Miller. Miller was a veteran of the city's police force, his name whispered in hushed tones in certain neighborhoods, known more for his heavy-handed tactics and quick temper than for any genuine commitment to community policing. His uniform was immaculate, a crisp, dark blue that seemed to absorb the light, making his presence feel even more imposing. His badge gleamed, a polished silver shield reflecting the harsh courtroom lights, a stark, almost cruel contrast to MJ's slightly rumpled, faded hoodie and jeans. A smirk, thin and self-satisfied, played on Miller's lips, a silent, chilling promise of the humiliation he intended to inflict upon the young man before him. He had seen countless kids like this come and go, and he relished the power he held over them. The charge against MJ was disorderly conduct and resisting arrest. On paper, it seemed minor, a misdemeanor. But in reality, it was a thunderclap threatening to shatter MJ's meticulously built future. It could derail his scholarship application to the state university, a full ride that was not just a personal dream, but his family's only tangible hope for a brighter tomorrow. His mother, a single parent working 2 jobs, had poured every ounce of her meager resources and boundless love into providing MJ with opportunities she never had. This scholarship was the culmination of years of sacrifice, of late-night study sessions fueled by cheap coffee, of countless hours spent in the library, dreaming of distant stars. The incident itself had been a cruel twist of fate. It occurred late one Tuesday night, just past midnight. MJ had been at his desk, wrestling with a particularly complex physics problem, when a frantic meow echoed from outside. Jasper, his fluffy ginger cat, an indoor creature of habit and comfort, had somehow slipped out when a delivery driver left the front door ajar. MJ, panicked, had grabbed his jacket and rushed into the cool night, calling Jasper's name. He'd spotted a flash of ginger near the perimeter fence of the local park, a park that, unbeknownst to him, closed at 11 p.m. He'd climbed the low fence, calling softly, desperately searching for his terrified pet. That's when Officer Miller's patrol car, its headlights cutting through the darkness, had pulled up. Miller, on a routine patrol, had seen a dark figure scrambling over a fence near a restricted area. His mind, already primed by years of patrolling what he considered problem areas, jumped to conclusions. He hadn't seen a worried teenager. He'd seen a suspicious black male breaking rules, a potential vandal, a troublemaker. His approach had been immediate, aggressive, and devoid of any attempt at de-escalation. "Hey, what do you think you're doing?" Miller's voice had barked, amplified by his patrol car's loudspeaker, startling MJ and sending Jasper bolting further into the shadows. MJ, heart pounding, had turned, hands raised. "Officer, wait. My cat ran into the park. I'm just trying to get him." He had tried to explain, to show his ID, reaching slowly for his back pocket where his wallet lay. But Miller had already exited his vehicle, his hand on his sidearm, his face set in a grim, unyielding mask. "Don't move. Hands where I can see them," Miller had yelled, misinterpreting MJ's slow reach for his ID as a threatening gesture. Before MJ could even utter another word, Miller had lunged, grabbing MJ's arm with surprising force, twisting it painfully behind his back. Resisting, huh? Always resisting. He'd slammed MJ against the cold metal fence, the impact knocking the wind out of him. MJ had gasped, crying out, "I'm not resisting, sir. I'm just trying to get my ID." But Miller had only tightened his grip, pulling MJ's arms back further, then forcing him to the ground, face down in the damp grass. The world had spun, a dizzying mix of pain, confusion, and fear. Now, in the sterile confines of the courtroom, MJ felt that same fear creeping back. He desperately wanted to shout, to interrupt Miller's carefully constructed lies, to scream the truth. But his mother's words, a quiet anchor in the storm, resonated. "Stay calm. Tell the truth." "All rise." The bailiff's voice boomed again, signaling the entrance of Judge Elias Thorne. Judge Thorne was a man of quiet authority, his presence commanding respect without needing to demand it. His black robes seemed to absorb the light, making him appear even more imposing, yet his gaze, as it swept the courtroom, was piercing. Missing nothing, he settled into his high-backed chair, a heavy, polished gavel resting silently before him, a symbol of the immense power he wielded. Case number 2025, CR 0712, State of Ohio versus Marcus Jones. Judge Thorne announced, his voice deep, resonant, and measured, filling the room with an almost hypnotic cadence. "Officer Miller, please present the state's case." Officer Miller rose, a confident, almost theatrical swagger in his step. He approached the witness stand, took the oath with a practiced ease, and began to recount his version of events. He painted MJ as defiant, aggressive, and disrespectful, a textbook bad kid. The defendant, Your Honor, was loitering in a restricted area after hours. When approached, he became belligerent, refusing to comply with lawful orders. He then physically resisted arrest, necessitating the use of appropriate force to subdue him. Miller's eyes flicked to MJ, a flicker of amusement dancing in them, a silent taunt. He embellished details, turning MJ's nervous fidgeting into aggressive posturing and his desperate attempts to speak into shouting obscenities and threats. He described MJ as a threat to public safety, a disruptive element. MJ felt a cold knot of dread tighten in his stomach. The lies were so blatant, so confidently delivered. He wanted to shout, to interrupt, to correct every falsity. But his mother's words echoed again. "Stay calm. Tell the truth." He took a shaky breath, forcing himself to remain still. Judge Thorne listened impassively, his gaze occasionally drifting to MJ, then back to Miller. He made a few meticulous notes on a pad, his expression unreadable, betraying no hint of his thoughts. "Mr. Jones," Judge Thorne finally said, his voice cutting through the silence. "Do you wish to present your defense?" MJ stood, his knees feeling like jelly. His voice was a little shaky at first, barely above a whisper. "Yes, Your Honor. I wasn't loitering. I was looking for my cat. He got out earlier, and I saw him run towards the park. It was late, I know, but I was worried. Jasper, he's an indoor cat, and he gets scared easily." He fumbled in his pocket, pulling out his phone, his thumb shaky as he navigated to a photo. He held it up, displaying a blurry but undeniably fluffy ginger cat. "This is Jasper, Your Honor." Officer Miller snorted, a loud, derisive sound that cut through the quiet of the courtroom like a knife. Several people in the gallery turned their heads, some with curiosity, others with thinly veiled amusement. The prosecutor, a young woman named Ms. Evans, shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Judge Thorne's eyes narrowed imperceptibly, a subtle tightening around the corners. But he said nothing, simply motioning for MJ to continue. MJ continued, his voice gaining a little strength, fueled by a desperate need to be heard. "When Officer Miller approached, I tried to explain. I told him about Jasper, and I reached slowly for my ID in my back pocket, just like I was taught to do. But he immediately grabbed my arm, twisted it, and pushed me against the fence. I wasn't resisting, I was just startled and in pain." He gestured vaguely to his shoulder, where a faint bruise still lingered. I kept saying, "I'm not resisting. Sir, I'm just trying to get my ID." But he just kept saying I was resisting and slammed me to the ground. He put his knee on my back, "Your Honor," and I couldn't breathe. Miller scoffed again, louder this time, a theatrical roll of his eyes. "A likely story, Your Honor. The cat defense. Original. Seen it all before." He shared a knowing look with Ms. Evans, who offered a thin, uncomfortable smile, clearly caught between her professional duty and her discomfort with Miller's blatant disrespect. The implication was clear: another young black man making excuses, trying to manipulate the system. Judge Thorne's gaze, which had been fixed on MJ, now shifted to Miller, a long, penetrating stare that seemed to strip away the officer's arrogance. "Officer," he said, his voice low, but carrying an undeniable edge that cut through the lingering echoes of Miller's scoff. "This is a court of law. Such commentary is inappropriate and will not be tolerated." Miller straightened slightly, the smirk faltering for a moment, but it quickly returned, a defiant flicker in his eyes. "Apologies, Your Honor. Just seen it all before." The unspoken message hung heavy in the air. Another one of them, trying to play the victim. The cross-examination began. Ms. Evans, the prosecutor, seemed intimidated by Miller's imposing presence and reputation. Her questions to MJ were perfunctory, almost apologetic, clearly designed to fulfill a legal requirement rather than genuinely challenge his testimony. Then, it was Miller's turn to question MJ, and the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted, becoming charged with a predatory energy. "So, Mr. Jones," Miller began, his tone dripping with sarcasm, his voice amplified by the microphone. "You expect us to believe you were out at midnight, in a closed park, chasing a cat? A cat that, conveniently, vanished into thin air when I arrived? Perhaps it was a phantom cat, Mr. Jones? A figment of your vivid imagination?" "He ran off when you grabbed me, sir," MJ replied, trying desperately to keep his voice even, to maintain the calm his mother had urged. "He gets scared easily. He's never been outside before." Miller laughed outright this time, a loud, booming sound that echoed through the courtroom, a sound of pure, unadulterated contempt. It was a sound designed to humiliate, to diminish. "Scared easily? Just like you, huh, kid? Scared of a little police interaction? Scared of answering for your actions?" He mimed a child crying, exaggerating the gestures, eliciting a few nervous titters from the back of the room, mostly from other officers present in the gallery, there to show solidarity with Miller. "Because from where I stood, you were fighting, thrashing like a fish out of water. You were a danger." MJ flinched, a sharp, involuntary movement. The accusation stung, not just because it was false, but because it felt like a familiar, tired script. He had heard it before, seen it played out in countless news reports, in the lives of boys who looked like him. He looked at Judge Thorne, hoping for some intervention, some sign of understanding, but the judge remained silent, his face unreadable, his gaze unwavering, fixed intently on MJ. Miller pressed on, clearly enjoying his performance, savoring the power he held. "Let's talk about pain, Mr. Jones. You claim I twisted your arm. Was it a little boo-boo? Did you cry for your mommy? Did you need a Band-Aid?" He leaned forward, his eyes glinting with malice, his voice dropping to a theatrical whisper. "Because my report states you were resisting arrest, actively fighting an officer of the law. Which one is it, Mr. Jones? The scared little boy or the defiant criminal?" MJ's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping in his cheek. His hands clenched into fists under the table, his knuckles white. He could feel the heat rising in his face, a flush of anger and shame. This wasn't about justice. It was about degradation, about stripping him of his dignity in a public forum. He felt the weight of every stereotype, every unfair assumption, pressing down on him. "Officer Miller," Judge Thorne interjected again, his voice still low, but now with a distinct chill that cut through the courtroom's tension. "Confine your questions to the facts of the case. Your personal commentary is irrelevant and unprofessional." Miller gave a dismissive wave of his hand, a gesture of casual defiance towards the judge. Right, Your Honor. Just trying to get to the truth here, which, in my professional opinion, is that this young man was causing trouble and got what he deserved. He was out late, in a closed park, acting suspicious. End of story." He turned back to MJ, his eyes gleaming with a triumphant, malicious satisfaction. "So, Mr. Jones, tell the court, are you usually this uncooperative with authority figures? Is this how you treat everyone who tries to tell you what to do? Are you just a natural-born rebel, always looking for a fight?" MJ looked up, his eyes meeting Miller's. The cop's face was a mask of smug superiority, confident in his power, certain of his victory. He was enjoying this, enjoying breaking down a young black man in front of a full courtroom, enjoying the sense of absolute control. And then, something fundamental shifted in MJ. It wasn't anger, not exactly. It was a quiet strength, born of generations of endurance, of resilience forged in the fires of adversity that settled over him. It was the legacy of his ancestors, the quiet dignity of his mother, the unwavering principles his father had instilled in him. He took a deep, steadying breath, his gaze moving from Miller, whose smugness now seemed brittle and fragile, to Judge Thorne, who was now watching him with an intensity that seemed to pierce through the very walls of the courtroom, an intensity that was suddenly, profoundly familiar. "Officer Miller," MJ said, his voice now clear, steady, and surprisingly calm, each word deliberate, resonating with a quiet power that commanded attention, silencing the last nervous coughs in the gallery. "I have always been taught to respect authority. My parents raised me to be honest and to treat everyone with dignity, regardless of their position." He paused, his eyes meeting Miller's again, holding the gaze, allowing the weight of his words to settle. Even when that dignity is not returned. Miller's smirk wavered, then faltered completely. The unexpected composure, the quiet strength from the scared kid, seemed to throw him off balance. He blinked, a flicker of confusion in his eyes. "And as for cooperating with authority figures," MJ continued, his voice gaining a quiet resonance that filled the silent courtroom, "I believe in upholding the law, Your Honor. I believe in justice. My father, Judge Thorne, taught me that these are not just ideals, but responsibilities that must be honored by everyone." The words hung in the air, heavy, echoing, reverberating through the stunned silence. Officer Miller's face, which had been contorted in a sneer of contemptuous amusement, froze. His eyes widened, his jaw dropping, a look of dawning, sickening horror spreading across his features. The prosecutor, Ms. Evans, gasped audibly, her hand flying to her mouth. A collective murmur, louder and more shocked than any before, swept through the courtroom, quickly followed by an even deeper, more profound silence. Judge Thorne, who had been leaning forward, his posture one of intense concentration, now sat perfectly still, his gaze fixed first on MJ, then slowly, deliberately, chillingly, shifted to Officer Miller. The quiet authority in his eyes had transformed into something cold, hard, and utterly devastating. The heavy, polished gavel, which had rested silently before him, seemed to hum with unspoken power, a silent harbinger of retribution. Miller's smugness evaporated like mist in the sun, replaced by a look of abject terror. He looked frantically, from MJ to Judge Thorne, then back to MJ, a desperate, frantic realization washing over his face. The scared kid, the uncooperative teen he had mocked, humiliated, and falsely accused, was the son of the very man who held his fate in his hands. The dramatic irony was a cruel, swift blow, a karmic boomerang. Every condescending remark, every sneering laugh, every fabricated detail, every false accusation, now boomeranged back with crushing force, amplified by the silent fury radiating from the bench. "Is that so, Mr. Jones?" Judge Thorne asked, his voice still measured, but now laced with an icy precision that made every word a hammer blow, each syllable a pronouncement of doom. "Your father taught you about justice and responsibility?" "Yes, Your Honor," MJ replied, his composure unwavering, his gaze steady. He knew the moment had arrived, the turning point for which he had endured so much. "He taught me that justice is blind, but that those who administer it must not be. He taught me that power comes with immense responsibility, and that it must never, ever be used to oppress or demean others, especially those who are vulnerable or voiceless." Judge Thorne nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving Miller, who now stood frozen, a statue of fear. "Officer Miller," he said, his voice now a low, dangerous rumble that filled the courtroom. "You have presented your case. You have also, it seems, presented a rather illuminating demonstration of your professional conduct in this courtroom today. A demonstration that speaks volumes, far more than any testimony." Miller stammered, his face a sickly shade of ashen white, beads of sweat forming on his brow. "Your Honor, I didn't realize. I was just doing my job. It was a misunderstanding." The bravado was gone, replaced by a desperate, fumbling attempt at damage control, a pathetic plea. "For mercy." "Your job," Judge Thorne repeated, his voice rising slightly, cutting through Miller's pathetic excuse, "is to uphold the law, officer. Not to mock defendants. Not to fabricate testimony. Not to use your position to intimidate or humiliate. And certainly not to disrespect this court or any individual who stands before it seeking justice." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a chilling, almost guttural whisper that carried throughout the silent room, a whisper that promised an inescapable reckoning, especially not when that individual is my son. The words landed like a thunderclap, shaking the very foundations of the courtroom. The entire room seemed to collectively hold its breath, a single, stunned gasp. Miller visibly recoiled, as if struck by an invisible force. His eyes darted around, searching frantically for an escape, for a hole to disappear into, but there was none. He was trapped, exposed, and utterly defeated. "Bailiff," Judge Thorne commanded, his voice now firm, clear, and utterly devoid of emotion. "Escort Officer Miller to the bench." Miller, his legs suddenly unsteady, stumbled forward, his face a mask of utter despair. He stood before the judge, a picture of abject fear and humiliation. The man who had swaggered, who had laughed, who had wielded his power with such cruel abandon, was now a trembling, broken wreck, his uniform suddenly seeming too large for his shrunken form. "Officer Miller," Judge Thorne stated, his voice resonating with the full weight of his authority, "your conduct in this courtroom today, and by your own admission, your conduct during the arrest of Marcus Jones, is a gross violation of your oath as a police officer and a profound disrespect for the principles of justice that this court represents. Your testimony was not only unprofessional but, I believe, deliberately misleading and perjurious." He picked up the heavy gavel, his hand steady. "I find Marcus Jones not guilty of all charges. Case dismissed." The gavel struck the wood with a sharp, decisive crack that echoed through the silent courtroom, a sound of finality, of justice delivered. MJ felt a wave of relief wash over him, so profound, so overwhelming, that it almost buckled his knees. He looked at his father, the judge, who gave him a subtle, almost imperceptible nod of pride and affirmation, a silent acknowledgement of their shared moment. "As for you, Officer Miller," Judge Thorne continued, his voice now ringing with an unwavering authority that left no room for doubt, "I am immediately filing a formal complaint with the Internal Affairs Division of the City Police Department, detailing your conduct today and during the arrest of Marcus Jones. I will personally ensure that this matter is investigated thoroughly and that appropriate disciplinary action is taken. Furthermore, I will be recommending a full review of your entire service record, given the pattern of behavior you have demonstrated. You have proven yourself unfit to wear that badge, unfit to serve and protect the public. You have demonstrated a clear pattern of abuse of power and a shocking lack of professional integrity." Miller's face crumpled. He tried to speak, to beg, to plead, but no words came out, only a choked, guttural sound. He stood there, defeated, his world collapsing around him. "You may be dismissed, officer," Judge Thorne concluded, his gaze unwavering, his voice a final, dismissive pronouncement. "And I suggest you reflect deeply on the true meaning of justice, respect, and the oath you so carelessly violated." Miller, a truly broken man, was led out of the courtroom by the bailiff, his earlier swagger replaced by a defeated, shuffling gait. The silence that settled over the room was heavy, but this time, it was a silence of profound satisfaction, of collective relief. Justice had been served, not just for MJ, but for every individual who had ever been dismissed, disrespected, or dehumanized by someone in a position of power. In the weeks that followed, the story exploded. Local news picked it up, then national outlets. Cop's humiliation. Judge's son reveals truth in court. Officer Miller's name became synonymous with police misconduct. The formal complaint filed by Judge Thorne, combined with the public outcry and the damning courtroom transcript, led to a swift and thorough internal affairs investigation. It uncovered a disturbing pattern of similar abuses, of aggressive arrests, fabricated charges, and a history of complaints that had been conveniently overlooked. Within a month, Officer Miller was not only suspended without pay, but faced formal charges and was eventually dismissed from the force. His career, built on intimidation and prejudice, utterly destroyed. The incident sparked a citywide conversation about police conduct, accountability, and systemic bias. Community leaders, activists, and even other officers spoke out, demanding change. The police department, under immense public pressure, initiated new de-escalation training protocols, established clearer guidelines for citizen interactions, and created a more transparent complaint review process. It was a small but significant step towards a more just system. MJ, his name cleared, his dignity restored, received his scholarship. He stood on the manicured lawns of Harrington University, the very institution whose dark, hidden history Dr. Nia Washington had so bravely exposed just months prior. He looked up at the grand, imposing columns of the main hall, no longer seeing just a symbol of academic prestige, but a place where truth could finally begin to heal old wounds, where new narratives could be built on honest foundations. His father, Judge Elias Thorne, stood beside him, his hand resting firmly on MJ's shoulder, a gesture of quiet pride and unwavering support. "You handled yourself with dignity, son," he said, his voice filled with an emotion that transcended mere pride. "You showed them what true strength looks like. Not the strength of a badge or a uniform, but the strength of character, of truth." MJ looked at his father, then back at the university building, then out at the bustling campus. "It wasn't just me, Dad. It was everything you taught me, and everything that came before me. The struggles, the resilience of our people. It all led to that moment. It was for Jasper, too." He smiled faintly, thinking of his ginger cat, now safely back home, curled up on his bed. The powerful life lesson resonated deeply, not just for MJ, but for everyone who heard his story. But most importantly, it demonstrated the unyielding power of truth and dignity in the face of injustice. It showed that even the most formidable figures, cloaked in the robes of power and privilege, can be brought down by their own arrogance, by their inability to see beyond their biases. Justice, though sometimes delayed, though often a long and arduous journey, can indeed be served in the most unexpected and satisfying ways. It is a testament to the enduring spirit of those who, despite being underestimated, mistreated, and marginalized, carry within them a quiet, unshakable strength, a strength that can shake the foundations of even the most entrenched prejudice and illuminate the path toward a more equitable and just world. Because in every struggle, there is a story that deserves to be told, and in telling it, we affirm our collective humanity and the unwavering pursuit of what is right. Like, comment, and subscribe for more stories of justice, truth, and power from behind the scene.